everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Before we get started with this very special episode, let us tell you some things. Let us whisper some sweet some things into your ears.
Ah, yes. Whispering, the favorite medium of every podcaster. As you know, we are going to journey together into two conversations today, one with Brittany Ashley and one with Kristine Sutherland. So that's very fun. Before we get there, I want to tell you, well, we want to tell you, we have some dates coming up. The first one headed your way is book club. If you are part of the Patreon book club, we're going to be talking about Wilder Girls by Rory Power, a book about quarantine. So that's fun. It's super, just like otherworldly. It's like really nice to put yourself in the headspace of being in quarantine. That discussion will be on Slack, May 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And the next book after that one will be Tipping the Velvet, which I've never read, but is sort of a queer classic. So excited to get there too.
And then if you're part of just the general world population at large, you can join us on Saturday, May 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We will be watching Buffy's Season 3, Episode 21 and 22, Graduation Day, Parts 1 and 2, together on Instagram Live. Join us.
Yes, and if you're going to be missing your graduation, please wear your graduation cap. Come along with us. We promise that everyone who attends will get a diploma. So,
yes. And I've been working on Frank's graduation cap. I've been toiling day and night.
Good.
Stitches are so tiny.
There's a lot of pressure on that cap. Also, as you know, Joanna Robinson and I have a new podcast that lives on the Buffering Patreon and the Storm Patreon. It's called Feels Like the First Time. And guess where we're headed next, Jenny?
Where are you headed next?
Batman.
Oh my God.
Yes. By the time you are listening to this podcast, I will have watched Batman Returns, I will have watched The Dark Knight, and I will have watched Birds of Prey. Those are our three selections for various reasons, which we discussed. So if you don't know, this is a podcast where I watch movies I've never seen somehow and talk about them both before and after watching them with Joanna. And it's very fun. You can get it as a patron on our Patreon or at the Storm's Patreon, which is patreon.com/Storm of Spoilers. We are patreon.com/BufferingCast.
Hell yeah. And also, hey, patrons, while we're at it, let me remind you that on Saturday, May 23rd, I will be conducting a patron Xena Hang, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, and we'll be, I think, watching an episode together. I'm nailing down the details. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna be nailing down the details till I die.
Seriously. This is like the fourth episode where you've been like, I'm going to figure it out. It's going to be like May 22nd. You're going to be like, so not clear yet. There will be a warrior princess, but other than that, details to come when you join.
Yes, listen.
I love it.
It's going to be fine.
I love it. Do you know what else I love? Jenny, is our new freaking zip hoodie. A black hoodie in our store with white text that reads, what does it say, Jenny? What does it say?
It says, me. Why are men? It says, why are men? It says, why are men? And listen, not all men, but you know the ones we're talking about.
Yeah.
The ones that are always making sex robots. The ones that are sketching me when I'm asleep for the me shrine in their crypt. The ones that are always leaving town when we break up and fucking off on jungle jaunts. You know how it is.
Yeah, we chose to leave the hashtag not all men off of our design, but you can do whatever.
Understood.
You can do whatever you want with that. I'm so excited about it. I cannot wait to get my own and wear it all over the place once I can leave the house again. And until then, wear it inside the house to, I'm sure, the deep conversation between my father and I. The hoodie is up now for pre-order. There's, a lot of fun things in the store too. The WOW pins, coming from Jenny's catchphrase, of course, are so awesome and they're going very quick. Crop tops are restocked. We have some other things that were out of the store that are back in the store. And also, while supplies last, the Queer and Forever Here enamel pins that came from my work are free with any order. You can just add them to your cart before checking out. So fun things happening in our store, bufferingthevampireslayer.com. Just click on shop.
Hell yeah. And without further ado, let us proceed. and welcome to a very special episode of Buffering the Vampire Slayer.
Did that sound like a crowd cheering?
Kind of.
Jenny and
It mostly sounded like you going,
I mean, I just feel like maybe we're a little bit deprived of like having a live studio audience. So I just needed to pretend like you were all here with me and Jenny, like cheering us on as we journey through this episode of television. This is our third episode on the body, which I think is important. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through these really special interviews that we've done here. But, I just feel that grief, loss, the shock of loss, the current climate, the episode and its beauty, there are a lot of ways to talk about it and there are a lot of ways to move through it. And so we've done our best to give you many ports into storm, if you will, to land with your feelings, your little suitcases of all your feelings. We've given you many places to dock. Perhaps you'll use all of them. Perhaps you'll use some. But before we get into today's meat and potatoes of Brittany and Kristine, I'm not sure who's the meat and who's the potato, but before we get there, I wanted to just take a minute with you, Jenny, to talk about the experience of last week and of sort of releasing our episode on the body, our conversation with Jen Malkowski, and getting to engage with so many of you about your experience of both the episode of television and the podcast.
Yeah. All you little sweeties out there listening to our pod, tweeting nice things at us. What the heck?
I know. It was so, as things tend to be in this community, it was so powerful to not only hear how the episodes were helping many of you, but also watching you connect to each other. Obviously, we're a large community over here at this point, and so it's just so incredible to see people be able to connect around the general experience of loss, grief, or just appreciation of the representation, but then also the power of seeing sort of some of the nuanced connections happen of people who are sharing not only in the experience of loss, but the specific experience of losing a mom or the specific experience of losing a dad at a particular age. And I know that we've both been seeing those connections happen and those conversations happen. And it's just really freaking special. So wanted to take a minute to just be like, yeah, you're all great.
Yeah, we love you. Hi.
Do you know what else I love, Jenny?
What?
The song that you made with Saul, Simon McWilliams.
Oh, thank you. Saul is very talented. Saul is a talented young man.
You are both very talented. And I know we talked about it a little bit already, but I sat with this piece of music for days and I could not stop playing it. I just played it over and over and over again because I couldn't get over how beautiful it was. And I know that many of you have also written in about your experience listening to that song. And somebody tweeted at us, I was going to write to you and say maybe you shouldn't do a song because, the episode itself doesn't have any music and blah, blah, blah. And boy, was I wrong. But, it's just interesting how we decide to honor these things and what choices we make, because I do think that could have been a valid choice. But Jenny, what you and Saul did, I'm going to send it to Kristine Sutherland because I think that she would really just be so honored to hear it too.
Ah, goodness. It was a real pleasure to work with Saul and a challenge to try to figure out how to do justice to this episode musically, or try.
What was your, I know that you can't tell us about the entire creation of the song, but did you have moments of clarity with Saul working together? Is there anything that sticks out to you about the experience of trying to honor this episode and I think successfully honoring this episode and Joyce?
I came into the session, which was one of the last writing sessions that I had before quarantine started, having a few things in my head. And one of them was that, you and I had discussed having the intro to the song include a piece of the melody from Listening to Fear.
Mm-hmm.
The chorus goes, "There's no getting used to it." So that's how the piece starts. And it just so happened that Saul, having watched the episode and having stewed on it a bit, had a chord progression ready that he thought would be an interesting place to start. And it just so happened that my melody and harmonization flowed directly into
Wow.
what he was working on.
Wow.
And then we were just sort of like off to the races.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a conversation about connecting three of the songs, this being the middle of the three. And I actually, Jenny, as the co-host of this podcast and the person who asked you to do that, did not even remember that is what we did. So I think that
Nice.
might be, I mean, I know that we have some musical geniuses listening, but I think for some people that will be a really exciting thing to learn, that connection exists too. A pre-arranged connection. And you and Saul, and I said this in the main episode, but you and Saul have collaborated before. And I just think that it's a magic thing. It's a magic thing when you put two people together who just click in that way like you do. So thank you.
He's so great.
Yeah, no, thank you for the song. And I said this on Twitter, but it was sort of like, I was the most overwhelmed I've ever felt of like full of gratitude that even though I had nothing to do with the song really at all, apart from like a few preliminary conversations, I just couldn't believe that my project, Buffering the Vampire Slayer, included this thing, that like I was even tangential to it, that I even got to sit next to it on the grand stage. So I just am thankful for it. And I know a lot of people are. So I wanted to give a little bit of voice to that. And one of these days, Jenny, I really think that we should do some special episodes where you talk about your journey through some of these songs and our journey through some of these songs, because it's fun.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's really fun for me. I don't know how interesting it would be to everybody else, but I love it.
They can let us know. If that sounds appealing to you. You just you know where to find us. You can email us. You can tweet at us. You can just like send us an owl with some post in its little beak.
Please. Yes.
So anyhow, the reason that we're here today with this bonus episode, this double bonus episode really, is because we know from hearing from you and also from our own experiences that a lot of you relate to Buffy's experience in this episode, to the surrounding characters' experiences. Maybe in the podcast that we put up, you related to our experiences that we talked about. But the truth of the matter is that the more representation we can put out there, the better odds of you feeling like you've been represented are. So, when we went into this episode, Jenny and I knew that it would be really important to talk to someone who had lost their mom. And that can mean so many things, right? Like we are going to move into this conversation that I had with Brittany Ashley. Brittany lost her mom when she was 6 years old. That's a very specific experience. It's a different experience than Buffy had. It's a different experience than Tara had. And it's probably a different experience than you had. But neither Jenny nor I has lost our mom. And so I just think that hearing from Brittany on her experience of this episode, both as someone who's lost her mom and as someone who hosts a podcast about grief specific to losing a mom, would be really important.
Yeah, how lucky are we to have kind of in the family somebody who could speak to this so personally. And she does so not just here on this episode, but also Brittany makes an entire podcast called Don't Tell the Babysitter, Mom's Dead, which she describes as a grief podcast where each episode includes a conversation with a fellow member of the Dead Moms Club, as well as an exploration into pop culture's representation of TV and film characters who have lost their mother. It's such a specific, but open, kind of universal, like we're all gonna lose people. That's just a part of life. Like we're all going to experience a grief that is adjacent to this grief, right? And Brittany makes this beautiful podcast where she opens up that conversation, a conversation that can feel taboo or difficult to approach, and does so really beautifully. She's so great. And the podcast is amazing. And we're so lucky to have her to talk to today.
Yeah, truly. And obviously, this is probably very obvious to you all, but you should go on over there if you are feeling in need of that representation, or if you just want to hear what she's doing, because it is really important and really special. And of course, there is an episode where she talks with somebody and their pop culture reference is the body. So that is over there for you. But there's so many different conversations that exist over there, including Brittany's own journey, because as you'll hear in our conversation, right, she's journeying with other people. But as is the case with anything, when you're journeying with other people about their experience, you're also kind of unpacking things for yourself. So Without us giving too much underlining to Brittany and what she has to bring to this conversation on the body, Jenny, do you want to go in and listen to my conversation with her?
In fact, I do.
Brittany Ashley.
Hello. Hello.
So Brittany, a few things about you, or perhaps you'd like to introduce this yourself. I was going to sort of tell everybody how the life of Brittany Ashley Venn diagrams with the episode The Body in multiple ways. But would you like to share with our listeners some of like your experiences and also work that you've done based on those experiences?
Yeah, of course. So my mom passed away when I was 6 years old. And so most of my life has been, I identify as a motherless person. Mm-hmm. And so I've always been really keyed into these types of representations. And I've always really appreciated them when they're done well. And this is obviously done incredibly well. And I also have a podcast called Don't Tell the Babysitter, Mom's Dead, that I started about 2 years ago, where I interview other people who have lost a parent, usually the parent being their mother, but I'm including some dads in there as well. I do a pop culture segment where I look at, me and the guest, we look at a representation in pop culture and, kind of discuss how well it was done, the parts that resonated with us.
On that note, since we're talking about the body, how do you relate to this episode personally, especially, losing your mom and being a fan of the show? What resonates with you?
I think that I've always identified most with, like, weirdly Tara's experience throughout this episode, because take the scene in Willow's dorm, for instance. Mm-hmm. It starts with Tara in her own headspace, and you could tell that something beyond this specific death of Joyce is on her mind. And she seems to be the only one who is a bit more stoic than everyone else. Like Willow and Xander and Anya, they're all playing out, specific aspects of the stages of grief. And she already seems like she's the one that's already in this acceptance space. And she's also the only one who is in the headspace to be able to complete small tasks. Like, she's like, I'll go grab your sweater. We should take care of patrolling. Like, she's the only one who knows that even though this horrible thing happened, the world doesn't stop, and that you have to go on living, Mm-hmm. And
I do. I've heard of it.
And so even in just that scene, before we get that reveal of her when she's talking to Buffy, she already seems like she's like the expert in the room. And then obviously that scene with Tara and Buffy is absolutely my favorite. I mean, it's, Buffy, up until this point, she is still trying to take care of other people. She, even when it comes up, like, you should have a snack, her response isn't, yes, I need that. It's, Dawn could use a snack. Or, she's concerned for Tara, and she's like, I'm sorry that you have to deal with this, as I'm sure that she's like, I'm sure this is really uncomfortable for you. There's something there that allows, because Tara knows that rather than telling Buffy what she needs or all these things that she could do for her in these moments, Tara knows instinctively that Buffy just needs the space to be able to talk about how she feels. Because I lost my mom at such a young age, I've watched friends lose their parent, and like, they kind of have come to me because they feel like I'm this person that they could be comfortable with, because I'm not going to project onto them, the idea of like a lot of Willow and Xander's, a lot of their high emotions, they're probably half about Joyce, the fact that their best friend lost their mother, who they've also gotten close with, but it's also about their own mortality. It's about the fact that their parents are going to die. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like sometimes when you talk to people who haven't had a similar experience, I feel like sometimes they're not as able to like access a place of actually listening because they're just thinking about, their own life, which is natural.
Right. Well, that's interesting though, Brittany, too, because you said first like that they were projecting something, and now I understand what you were saying. But when you first said that, what I thought you meant, which I also find to be common when someone who hasn't suffered loss is interacting with someone who is suffering loss, is the projection of what they think they're supposed to say.
Totally.
Like that also. And I think that's also there with Xander and Willow. And I mean, Anya says whatever she wants, so she's kind of saved from that. But yeah, I think that both exist for so many of them, that they just don't have the tools to say what's real, which Tara does.
Absolutely. And it's like this, because Tara has experienced this, there's like an unspoken like comfort that she's able to give Buffy that Buffy can't get from anyone else. It's like meeting your first other gay person or something. It's like once you meet someone who's also lost a parent or is going through it, it's like you instantly feel connected to them, and you have this like unspoken connection and this unspoken language that only is shared through other people who've experienced that. I have ignored like that most of my life. It's only within the past few years that I've really started to like seek out these groups, and I'm in 2 different grief groups, one of which I started, and
nice.
And obviously also this podcast has created community, and those conversations that I have with other people that have experienced it really helps, me feel not alone, them not feel alone. And then the people listening, it's like, it's able to put language and put words to something that isn't often talked about, which I think this episode, but also this show in general, is able to do in a really great way.
You, I know, really journeyed very deeply into your family's experience of the loss of your mom through your podcast. You were sick, so you were so small, and obviously it's something that you lived with for all of those years in different forms, I'm sure. But what was first that journey like for you to explore stuff from all those years ago?
I mean, it was so many things. It was very hard to hear because I just kept imagining, similar to the way that Buffy was having little like fantasies about how different her life could be if this happened, if she was there, if her mom got better, things like that. Like there's little, fantasies that I would have of how different my life would be and how different I would have turned out if I would have had her around. There's like anger that, was maybe pent up, that I've just kind of accepted it as like a fact all my life that this thing happened to me, but I've never actually expressed like a real anger of like how fucked up it was. But then also so much like joy to just hear my dad and my aunt talk about my mom in such a positive, sweet way. But, obviously it's very bittersweet to know that this person existed, but I didn't get to have them around. Hearing my dad's story, like hearing my dad talk about my mom was definitely the hardest part, because I could tell that he does not feel comfortable or doesn't like, the space doesn't exist for him to talk about her very often. My mom died on Valentine's Day, and she had had pancreatic cancer for 4 years, and she had been told multiple times that she only had, X amount of months to live. And then she just like mentally kept pushing herself, kept doing all these different treatments to just like stay with us for longer. And I guess on my 6th birthday, my birthday is in the end of December, my 6th birthday, that was like her goalpost was, or her landmark. She was like, I want to at least get past Brittany's birthday. But apparently there's no documentation of my 6th birthday. So my mom was always adamant about like, take a zillion pictures, like videotape everything. But I guess on my 6th birthday, she just like looked so sickly and ill that like my dad and my aunt thought it was best that like nobody take pictures, because they didn't want me to remember her that way. I think that I modeled my own way to grieve after my dad because he, all our lives, he just never wanted us to worry to his own detriment. So I think he repressed a lot of his own feelings because, maybe he was young. He's early 30s. So like maybe he thought that it was best that he looked, quote unquote strong. Maybe he thought it was best that like we didn't see him cry because then we would feel bad. Like whatever he did, he never wanted to burden anyone or ask for help. And so, obviously me now as a 31-year-old, I look back on that and I'm like, oh, fuck, I did that. Like I never asked for help. I never talked about it because I felt like talking about it would be a burden. Like making other people sad would be a burden to them. And so I just like shoved it down, which, hopefully this isn't a spoiler by any means, but the next episode is really powerful because, Buffy as a character having to deal with this very human thing where everyone, like anyone who goes through this needs help. But because we've established her character as someone who has such a hard time ever asking for help because she believes that she could do everything on her own, like she refuses to let other people be involved in like she doesn't, most of the time she pushes away her friends because she doesn't want them getting involved in like these dark things. And she like doesn't know how to ask for help. So having to deal with like this very human thing, how does she deal with that? And how does the grief come out? And, and that was season 5 and season 6 of Buffy is, as an adult, it's where I feel most like connected to Buffy as the character because it's this person who feels like they have to take care of everyone and put up this really strong front, but really needs something herself, but doesn't know how to ask for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like the podcast for you was sort of like an opening of that door, like that was part of the shifting landscape of being able to, I mean, maybe not ask for help so specifically, but to sort of like open yourself as well? Like obviously you're opening yourself to hearing the stories of other people, but do you feel like you got to connect in ways and grieve in ways that you hadn't before?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I had like told myself, I think for most of my life, that this is just a thing that happened to me, but it wasn't like trauma. Like, it doesn't live in my body. It's something that I didn't have any control over, so therefore I don't understand why it would affect me. And so I think I might have shared this with you at some point, but I mean, the reason that I like seeked out this therapist that I've been going to for the last 2 years is because I was in a relationship. I was in like a 2.5 year long relationship where my partner had told me, I think that because your mom died, you have abandonment issues. And I was like, you're insane. And so then I went and saw this therapist. Like, it just feels so silly that as a, I think it was like 29 at the time. It's just like it's so sweet to look back on and be like, oh, you naive little baby. But I had just always...
It's hard to see things when you're inside of them too.
Definitely.
I mean, it's a lot easier for an outsider to like theorize on things that might be happening.
Definitely. But yeah, I was able to then like through therapy, through this podcast, through talking to other people, through, more research, I was just able to like give myself more compassion about some of the ways that I am, or some of like, the little like activations or little triggers that I have, because they all come from this traumatic event that happened. And it was a really positive experience for me. And it really just like opened my eyes, and just also just gave me more compassion for like the very like struggling parts of me, and realizing that it was something that I didn't have any control over, and I've done the best that I can,
Right. I mean, emotions are so funny like that. Funny, maybe not, haha, but basically you can't escape them, your emotions. You know, like even if you do everything in your power or unintentionally to sort of say like, no, it's okay. That wasn't my experience and I'm okay. Like some way, somehow, these emotions will surface and manifest themselves, even if it is, you know, you said you were 6 when you lost your mom, you're 29 when you're beginning this therapy journey and the podcast and all of this stuff. Like that's a space of many years, but they were there for you, waiting for you to sort of like address them and open them up and explore them. And I think that that's so true for so many of us that, you know, sometimes we can't do things until a particular time. We can't face things until a particular time, and they'll be there. They'll wait.
Definitely. And everyone's on their own timeline, and grief is something that it's constant. It's like it comes in cycles and in waves. I don't think it's a linear path. And I felt a lot of like embarrassment and shame that I hadn't explored these things earlier, but I also like didn't really have the tools.
Something that I feel like we touched on a little bit, but that I would love to hear your thoughts more on too, is you said in your podcast, you know, you're talking about personal experiences, yours and your guests, but also that you are talking about a pop culture moment, reference, what have you. And so like, obviously this episode, and I would agree with you, I think like this episode in companionship with the following episode, Forever, exist in that like sort of collection. So can you talk to us maybe a little bit about how you feel about this representation, especially as it stands amongst other representations that are out there in pop culture?
Oh, 100%. So as like I think a common trope among superhero stories is obviously like, you know, a parent dies and that is the inciting incident. That's the origin for, you know, like Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Punisher, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, like their parent, like almost every single superhero. It's like a thing that happened in their life that they experienced that has allowed them to now want to fight evil, make the world a better place. It sets them apart from their peers. You know, they don't have family anymore. So now they can dedicate their lives to serving others because they're like untethered to connections or putting people in danger. But Buffy is so much different than that. You know, her pre-mom dying, she has so much responsibility that her needs and her wants always come last. You know, like obviously like the conceit of the first 3 seasons is that she just wants to be a normal high school girl. And, but she has like this thing that sets her apart from all of her peers. But when it comes to death and loss, I mean, it's something that she's always surrounded by. And it's always this like supernatural element where she has to be really emotionless about it because it's just part of her everyday life. So yeah, like with other superheroes, their parents dying allowed them to be like beyond human or made them be super. And with Buffy, it's like the inverse. Like her mom dying was what showed her that she is human. She's not super only. You know, it's the only evil that she can't fight and win against.
Well, something that you mentioned earlier too that I think is really important, and I think kind of is echoed in even what you're saying now, is that grief is not linear, and also maybe expanded out here. Grief is not something that is going to take a format that you think it's going to take.
So there's this book called Motherless Daughters by, I think, Hope Edelman. But there was something in there that was really interesting that was all about, I mean, that's where I was starting to put together that grief isn't linear and that it comes in waves, is that she talked about it through the lens of like, you'll experience different versions of grief based on different events in your life. And so the one that I most responded to was when you reach the age of, you know, your parent when they passed away. And so I'm 31 now, and my mom passed away when she was 31. And she got sick when she was 27. And I think around my 27, 28, that's when I started being really curious. And so that kind of actually made a lot of sense to me, because I think you just have, you know, I can like look at a picture of my mom when, you know, she was in her late 20s, early 30s and be like, holy shit. Like I could not imagine being like going through what you were going through at this age, because I just feel like I have so much more life to live and so much more to learn and so much more to feel. And I couldn't imagine what this young person was going through. Because when I was younger, I was like, 31's old. Like,
right. Yeah, of course.
but then when you turn 31, you're like, oh my God, I'm still a child. Like, I've eaten so much cereal in the last 2 weeks. Like, I am such a baby still. I still see myself as a kid in a lot of ways. And so that like created a different wave of grief, or, when if you, decide to get married or have kids, like that also adds to it as well. Events that they're not going to be at, like there's just these landmarks or milestones in life where you're going to feel different waves of grief. And yeah, it's just not like a straight line. Like, I don't think I've ever reached a point of like, I don't know if you ever really reach a point of like acceptance in some way, like some transcendental way that you're led to believe. Whoever made the 5 stages of grief, I know it's a person's name, but like I feel like they were also responsible for the fucking food pyramid that just fucked us all up. Where I was like, I need to eat 10 pieces of bread a day.
You and I, Brittany, are huge fans of organization.
Yeah.
So like I know I can understand why, right? Like you would want to take something and put it in a pyramid or put it put it in order, but it really does. Food pyramids aside, it does a disservice to try to take something that is a process and make it into sort of like an outline.
Yes.
One of the conversations we had, I can't even remember which one now, but somebody also talked about that. The fact that death is also not an event that happens like right at this moment, that death is also a process that is messy and not linear, and not what we are often shown, in media, to bring it back there. So
that's why the representations are so important, to see that like it's okay to be this certain way. Like even just in this episode alone, we see like 6 very different and specific reactions to a death. And the beauty of that is that, there's people who connect to all parts of those, and they see that like that's okay, and that their experience wasn't wrong. Because I think that as a kid, seeing every Disney movie where like, their parents die and then they become this like special person but they also are incredibly alone. It just like creates this thing in your mind that like you are incredibly like special and different, but not necessarily in the best way.
Yeah. And also, the fact that, and I think Buffy as a whole series exists like this, where people watch it again and again, because depending on where you are in your life, things are going to hit you differently. But I know that that's true for a lot of people with this episode in particular, that, people who have gone through loss might watch it, 1 year and really identify with a particular character or a couple of characters. And then, a few years later or several years later, all of a sudden understand, why Xander punches the wall.
Yeah.
Like that like that variety of experience is good for different people, and also for sometimes the same person,
totally,
just at different times.
And one day I'll feel represented by that coroner who's like, don't touch the body.
Oh God.
Or whatever. And I'll be like, hey,
can't wait for that journey for you. Yeah,
he is hardened by this work. He is just trying to do his job. He is direct.
Well, Brittany, will you tell the people who don't know where they can find you, but also where they can find your podcast, since it is so relevant to what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
Today.
So my name is Brittany Ashley, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brit27Ash. It's BRITT27ASH. I also co-host the Angel podcast, Angel on Top, with Laura Zach.
You co-host an Angel podcast?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow, I can't. Our interests are so aligned.
It's crazy. I know, it's insane. And then Don't Tell the Babysitter Mom's Dead is on Spotify. It's on iTunes. And yeah, you can check that out.
Yes, and you should, because you should check out all the things that Brittany does. Most of you probably already know that, but in case you didn't, now you do. And in the show notes, obviously, all of those links will be there for you, so you can find them. Brittany, thank you for sharing your experience with us and like being here for the conversation in this episode, but also for all of the work that you do outside of this conversation in providing resources and media representation for people who are going through loss and grief and moving through their own messy emotions around all of this.
My pleasure.
Man, what a great conversation, you know? Something that really resonated with me about your conversation with Brittany was when she was talking about how she had sort of internalized the loss of her mother as like something that happened to her. It's just something that happened to her. And like, you know, it's not like a trauma or anything. It's not like something that you're going to be, you know, living with and working through for the rest of your the rest of your mortal life.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of us have a tendency to take this attitude of like, well, it's just something that happened. And I just have to like, you know, be tough, and like other people have it worse. And, you know, I'm sure other terrible things are going to happen in life, and I'll just have to, you know, muscle through those too. But to hear Brittany's moment of realization where she sort of like figured out, oh, I need to like give myself space to actually experience this, and like it's okay to need that space.
Yeah.
You know, like that self-compassion, I think, is so very important, and something, you know, something we could all stand to give ourselves a little bit more of.
Yeah. I think many of us do this thing where we say like, there's nothing we can do about it, right? So what's the point in trying to do anything? Like, I can't change it. Like, that's another avenue of this. And it's like, no, you can't. And I think something Brittany said in the conversation too was, it's not like you're just going to find this place of peace with it. Like suddenly there's no more journey to go on, but that journey is important. It's not a journey towards resolving your feelings. It's a journey towards understanding your feelings. And since feelings change all the time, it doesn't end. It's how in touch are you with your experience, and what does that do for yourself? And I think what Brittany is finding, especially with the journey that she's going on through the podcast, is that the more that she's learning about herself, the more she has to offer to other people, because then she can speak on it. And sometimes we just need these like words. That's why I think that you and I, Jenny, felt so strongly about including many voices in this, because sometimes 5 people say the same thing, but they say it different ways. And it's the 4th person in line that like unlocks it for you. And so I think that's also part of the power of journeying through our feelings on loss, our experiences of loss, our experiences of grief, because we then have more to offer to ourselves and others.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brittany. Obviously, thank you. I think we mentioned this up at the top, but I assume you all know this, but not only is Brittany part of our friend group, but Brittany is part of our family over at Buffering, because she's one of the 2 co-hosts of our Angel podcast, Angel on Top. So, you know, and also honestly, like, I know that you and Brittany have never gone head to head on your Buffy fandom, Jenny, but like, you 2 definitely, of the 4 of us, are the heaviest hitters in terms of Buffy fandom. And I think that Brittany might out-fan you for this show. So she may be the Buffiest of us all.
Interesting take.
An argument, a debate, a battle for another time. So we are going to move now into a segment from an interview that we did, Jenny, in 2016, which feels like 100 million years ago, give or take. What about you? How does it feel for you?
Approximately, was this in the Paleozoic era?
We had the chance to talk to Kristine Sutherland. She was our second cast interview. We had talked with Armin Shimmerman And then Kristine, we were at Band Candy is where we were exactly. And so if you're curious about the pieces of the interview that aren't included here, go back. It's a fun jaunt anyway. Us and Kate left talking about Band Candy with an inset for Kristine Sutherland. Yeah, it's very fun. So if you want something to do after this, go hop back and either re-listen or listen for the first time. But this is the piece of our interview where we talked about the body. And so we tucked it away in a nice little safe spot and said, like, be careful. Okay, we're going to need you in like 427,000 years. And luckily, technology is great and it's still here. And we get to share with you the conversation that we had with her about her time working on this episode and just like in general, her experience of Joyce and of post the body, sort of like being in the fandom and all those sorts of fun things.
Yeah, so let's take a listen. Dear listener, lean in and observe this beautiful conversation. Some of it available for the first time right now here with Kristine Sutherland.
Well, Kristine, thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. We are, as you might imagine, very excited to be able to have you on our podcast.
Oh, thank you.
We love to start with everybody's origin story. Can you tell us about your audition process and your earliest impressions of the character of Joyce Summers?
The audition page actually just said Buffy's mom.
How rude.
Yeah. I was actually considering just stopping acting because I didn't like the audition process in LA. And so I was contemplating writing my agent this letter, but it was really hard to write. So I was just in this holding pattern. And then he said, I've got an audition for you. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to this audition because I haven't told him I don't want to do this anymore. And then I went in and I only had like 4 lines. And I thought, gee, I don't know how they're going to tell with 4 lines.
Were you reading at that point with Sarah, or, was this just a cold read in a room? Were they testing for chemistry or just...
No, Sarah wasn't there. I was just reading with a reader, and Joss and a few other people were in the room. So I went home, and then I was quite surprised when they called up and said, you're going to be Buffy's mom. So I patiently waited to find out what my name was going to be.
Joyce was a mom to Buffy, but also a mother figure to so many of the Scoobies. What was it like for you to forge those relationships with the characters and the actors over time?
Well, the first forging was my relationship with Sarah, which was really easy. It just felt... there was a real chemistry between us, and it just felt really right and really easy. So, and then the second relationships that I forged were with the rest of the cast, which didn't really happen until season 2, because I was rarely in a scene with those guys until season 2. So the first season, my basic relationship was with Buffy, with Sarah. I actually didn't know for a long time that this was going out in the universe. I mean, this was early days of the internet. And I remember like studying search engines because this was before Google. You'd have to go such and such plus sign, such and such plus sign, and you were lucky to come up with anything.
Right. Yes. Oh, some of our listeners will be learning this for the first time. Jenny and I are very much with you on that plus journey.
So the first time that I really understood what was happening was when we were doing a scene and I had worn the wrong earrings. And I said to the continuity woman, oh, well, no one is going to notice. And she looked at me and she went, oh, yes, they will. Before that, I didn't really have a concept of the audience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which, strangely enough, is the thing that I love about film work, is it feels very intimate. My husband does a lot of stage work, and he loves it. The idea for me to be standing on a stage in front of people is absolutely terrifying. But I've always enjoyed working in front of the camera, and I don't know why, because there's 100 people in the room. That's a 99-seat house in the theater.
Right.
Right.
But somehow they were always invisible to me.
Mm-hmm.
They were people who were all there to support you. And at the end of the day, I always felt that it was just between me and the camera. So, and that there was sort of an anonymity about that, which is pretty funny because it ended up being anything but anonymity. I'm very, very proud to have gotten the opportunity to play a single mom because my mom was a single mom. And I remember when my parents got divorced, very few people were divorced, and it was a very socially unacceptable thing to be. It was a world of couples. People in the neighborhood would sort of, that's the people down the street, and divorced, a family that's been impacted by divorce. So I really felt that sting of being the outsider. So, but my mom was a terrific mom. I mean, she was forging new territory that was very difficult. And things have changed so much over the years, but I think television was very much behind the change in our society. And so I was really glad to be part of that pivotal turn and represent a mom who was having to struggle with a child. And because one of the things that happens in a divorce is your parents lose sort of credibility with their children. They lose a certain amount of authority. Mm-hmm. And I think when the show starts, that's something that Joyce is really wrestling with. It's so much a coming of age story. And one of the things that I love about it is that when she's in high school, it's a world of black and white. There's good and there's evil, and it's really easy to tell the difference. Mm-hmm. And as she gets older, it becomes grayer and grayer. Mm-hmm. Which is, of course, what life becomes as you grow emotionally.
Yes.
So Buffy is a supernatural slayer, but she's also a human person growing up in the world. What qualities do you think Joyce gave to Buffy or strengthened in Buffy as her mom?
I'm sure that she was a very nurturing mother from the beginning, because confidence and belief in yourself, I think a lot of that comes from unconditional love by your parents. And if not your father, so your mother. As a daughter, you look to your mother as a role model. I think they had a difficult period during the divorce, and you sort of see them starting this new life together, which is pretty rocky. But I think Joyce, when she gets over her shock that her daughter is the Slayer, I think she sort of, at a certain point was able to go with it and, try to be supportive of her. And sometimes watching your children go to places that you didn't go in your life, you support their dreams. And so I think that once they turned the corner on the Slayer issue, that Joyce wanted to do what she could do to support Buffy. I think at times it was hard for her to fully understand the scope of what her daughter was doing out of the house. But in certain episodes, it came into the house. And so I think Joyce, over time, came to realize the enormity of what rested on Buffy's shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We know that you have a daughter, and we're wondering, this is sort of a two-part question. We'd love to know if your daughter has watched the series. And then in that same vein, as a mom, we're wondering what you think the show has done for, perhaps your daughter, but to other young audiences and especially young women in particular.
My daughter, because I felt she was too young at the time to watch it, so she wasn't allowed to watch it.
How old was she when the series was airing?
She was 5.
That's it's a little small.
And we're talking about a kid who, when we felt she was old enough to watch E.T., she sobbed and she was terrorized. So Buffy was like not on the cards.
Right.
Very sensitive. And so that didn't happen. But the first time she saw it was in Italy. We would go back there in the summers, and by that time she spoke Italian, and I forget what year it was that Buffy hit Italy. And everybody young was absolutely crazy for it. And so with her friend Flavia, they watched it together in Italian.
Incredible that her first experience of it was in Italian.
Yeah, and of course it was dubbed. And Italian dubbing is so different from what I feel was the essence of Joyce.
Yeah.
Because their language is so up and down, so different than ours is. Actually, I saw it dubbed in German, and I felt that the German dubbing was much closer. So that was kind of interesting that she saw the show, but she didn't hear my voice.
Right. I wonder if that was helpful in not seeing just her mom on screen. Maybe it gave her one step away.
Yeah, years later, she watched The Body, and that was really hard for her.
Wow, I can't imagine.
I mean, that episode is devastating for so many of us to watch when it is not our own actual mom on screen. I cannot imagine what that experience must have been like for her.
Yeah, I think in many ways that's the biggest impact that I've had in terms of what we were talking about earlier. Is I know, especially when I go to cons and people come up to talk to me, that's the thing that they most want to talk about. There are just so many children and young people who've lost a parent or a sister, who are trying to come to terms with grief. And it's a really difficult thing to come to terms with grief when you're young. I always think about them. There were 2 sisters who I met in Europe who had lost their mother literally around the same time that Joyce died. And that's something I feel really good about, because I lost my father when I was 28, and I had no idea how to handle that. And I lost a boyfriend when he was 15, and I had no idea how to handle that either. They were just these. I remember sitting on the steps of a house and just going, how can he not be here? Where is he? Just that. It's just so profound when you're young, and none of your peers generally have experienced that. So you feel terribly alone, and you can't really talk to your peers about it and what's going on inside of you. You don't want to talk to other adults about it. So I think that is what I cherish the most is that episode, in which I didn't do anything but be dead. I can't say it has anything to do with my acting, but I feel so wonderful to be a part of something that helped so many people and continues to help so many people deal with loss and deal with grief. The thing that was just so unbelievable that struck me was Willow not being able to figure out what to wear.
Oh, God. I just got the chills when you said that.
Yeah, and I totally understood it, because when my father died, I didn't know what to wear. I did something kind of wildly inappropriate just because I was so angry at the world for taking him away from me. And so I wore a blue and white floral dress with ruffles on it, very popular at the time. And I painted my nails like neon pink.
Mm.
because I was like, I am not wearing black.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything black. I don't know what to do. I'm wearing this because I don't know what else to do. I want to stand up to death.
Mm.
And so that just like, oh my gosh, I just completely lost it. And I had a hard time not crying through the episode when I was supposed to be dead. But when she came through the door and went, Mom, oh my gosh, I couldn't stop crying. We kept having to, cut because there's like tears rolling down my face.
Oh, God.
It kicked in all the old grief of decades ago in losing my father. So I think you're absolutely right that it brings all that up for everybody. And I think when you do rewatch the episodes as you get older, the meanings of it deepen, and the layers and the metaphors deepen. The more life experience you have, the more you get in touch with the many levels that Joss was writing about.
Kristine, thank you so much. It's just been such a delight to talk to you and to have you as a part of the podcast. Joyce is so dear to so many of our hearts in so many different ways. So thank you again for being a part of this with us.
Oh, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me.
Of course. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Man, oh man, were we ever so young.
I know. It was really like I went through the raw audio just from start to finish to do like a new edit and figure out which pieces to pull in. And I just I had such tenderness in my heart for obviously for Kristine, but also for tiny us.
For little us.
Just journeying through, being like, oh my God, Kristine Sutherland. So yeah. And so, I didn't know, and I know, Jenny, you didn't either, I don't think, about Kristine's experience of loss until we had this conversation with her. And she's just, I don't know, every time I listen to it, no matter how many times I go through this interview and hear her voice, I feel like I'm listening to my own mom. She just gives you that comforting feeling, like she's going to put some little marshmallows in your cocoa.
She's just so kind and gracious and such a pleasure to talk to.
Yeah, truly. Something that really struck me too in putting Brittany's conversation with Kristine's conversation was these parallels, both of them speaking about sort of feeling alone in their grief, especially as young people, that Brittany was sort of talking about being the only young person in her grade who had gone through this loss. So she was like the touchstone for people. And Kristine talked about being somebody who had gone through loss at a young age and didn't know how to connect with other people. And so it just underlines for me more and more how powerful these conversations can be, because there probably are so many people out there who do feel like they don't have a way to connect and they don't have a way to find their experience represented, or just find somebody to sit across the table with a cup of coffee and chat with. So
yeah, I was also really, really interested hearing Kristine talk about her daughter's relationship to the show, particularly to the body, but also just sort of it was really fun to hear that she wasn't watching it while it was airing. And then when she did watch it, she watched it in Italian, an Italian dub.
Yeah, there's something just incredible. I would love if any of you have access to find us a clip of Joyce being overdubbed by the Italian actress who overdubbed her. I would love to see it. Because what a funny thing. It's funny enough to see your parent, on screen doing anything, I'm sure. But then to see their face and their mouth moving, but it's somebody else's voice. It's
It's so wild.
So we now move along our way. Next week, we'll be back with season 5, episode 17, Forever, which I think Brittany, briefly mentioned this in our conversation that, Forever and the body really do go together as a bit of a set. So I'm sure we'll be digging in a little bit more to the topics and the themes and stuff that we've brought up in the last 2 weeks. But I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. It was, and we've talked about it a little on social media and maybe a tiny bit in the episodes themselves, but it was a really tricky and complicated thing to walk into this episode, one that we've been thinking about for so long in the current landscape, because we knew that it was a really difficult time for a lot of people. And I feel, Jenny, that what we hoped would happen, I think did happen with these conversations, which is that, yes, it's hard, but also a lot of you wrote in to say, like, I haven't watched this episode since I watched it the first time because it was too much. But now I have this community and I know that you'll be here. You know, Jenny and I will be here to talk about it. And also that the larger community is here to be there and to sort of like act as this beautiful landing pad for these feelings. And so it's just so special to know that anything that we've done has contributed to you all feeling safe in having these conversations and exploring some of these feelings and these darker and more complicated themes. So
yeah, thank you for trusting us to make this, and thanks for listening, and thanks for letting us be your flight attendants. Is that? Would you like another cola?
I love that. I would also like to offer you a Biscoff cookie because that is
reason. Hell yeah.
That's truly the reason to fly in the sky.
Yo, I don't want to, this is a little off topic, but do you know about Biscoff
cookie butter?
Cookie butter? Okay, cool. Just checking.
I'm sorry. I'm a Biscoff aficionado. I know about everything there is to know about Biscoff. But yes, thank you.
My mistake.
You know, some of our listeners might not know that you can spread Biscoff cookies on other cookies or even on Biscoff cookies themselves, which I'm going to call a Biscoff sandwich. Squared, Biscoff squared. Biscoff with 4 Fs.
The possibilities are both endless and deeply fucked up. So please enjoy your Biscoff cookie butter. This episode was not sponsored by Biscoff cookie butter, but Biscoff, you can send us some cookie butter for free. Thanks.
Yes, please. Please. Jenny, do you want to tell the lovely listeners who you are in case they've forgotten along the way? They got so confused about Biscoff that they are lost now.
Up here in first class, I'm Jenny Owen Youngs, and when I'm not flying with friendly skies with all of you, I am making hot jams. You can hear some of them at jennyowenyoungs.com. You can find me on all these streaming platforms. You can tweet at me at Jenny Owen Youngs, and you can also, if you like, listen to me talk about another petite blonde protagonist over on Veronica Mars Investigations, my other podcast. And I will mention, in case anybody is interested, that recently my co-host Helen made me watch the entire BBC miniseries of Pride and Prejudice, which is 6 hours long. And we made a very special episode in which I explained back to Helen, to the best of my ability, what happens in 6 hours of Pride and Prejudice. We also do a lot of accent work and impressions in that special episode. So if you're looking for something to take the edge off after all of this body talk, would recommend Pride and Prejudice.
Back here in Coach, hope everyone's feeling cozy. I'm Kristen Russo.
A woman of the people.
You can learn more about the work that I do outside of this podcast on my website, KristenNoeline.com. That's KristinnNoeline. That spelling will also get you to my Twitter. It will get you to my Instagram. And a place it'll also get you to is me live tweeting lots of movies I have never before seen, which is a part of a podcast that I now do with Joanna Robinson. It is a Patreon-only podcast called Feels Like the First Time. We've journeyed through Lord of the Rings, Alien, Indiana Jones, Mad Max. We're moving into Batman. After Batman is the Fast and the Furious. It's a good time. So you can find out all about that at KristinnNoeline.com.
Buffering the Vampire Slayer is on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at BufferingCast. You can always drop us an email at bufferingthevampireslayer@gmail.com.
Yes, and you can support us if you'd like by rating and reviewing us, by buying some of our fun, hot, wonderful merch, including our new Why Are Men hoodie, and by joining our Patreon family, patreon.com/bufferingcast. All of this information, of course, always there for you at bufferingthevampireslayer.com.
Hell yeah. And till next time.